Have you ever picked up someone who filled you with fear the moment they got into your car? It was
Like millions of others during the pandemic, I lost my job. To make ends meet, I started driving for Uber at night. Strange passengers were part of the job, people who were drunk, arguments, and uncomfortable conversations. But what happened on a Friday night in October changed my life forever. It was around 12 a.m. I had just dropped off a passenger at a hotel when a new ride request popped up on my phone. The pickup was only 6 minutes away, outside an old bowling alley in a deserted strip mall. I had no idea this wasn't just another ride. It was the beginning of the most terrifying night of my life. When I arrived at the pickup location, the parking lot was almost completely empty. The bowling alley looked closed, and the only light came from a single flickering street lamp. Standing beneath it was a tall man. He was wearing a gray hoodie with both hands in his pockets and his head lowered. I rolled down my window and asked, "Derek?" Without saying a word, he gave a slight nod and slowly climbed into the back seat of my car. I confirmed the destination shown in the app. In a cold, flat voice, he replied, "Yeah, that's the one." There was no anger in his voice, no fear, just an eerie emptiness, as if every emotion had been drained from him. I pulled away from the curb, but just a few minutes later, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. In the rear-view mirror, his eyes were locked on the back of my neck. He hadn't looked out the window even once. For nearly 5 minutes, the car was so quiet that the only sound was the engine. The way he kept staring at me made me increasingly uneasy. Trying to break the silence, I asked, "So, how's your night going?" He stayed quiet for a few seconds before answering in a low voice, "I just needed to get away from there." I glanced at him in the mirror. "Get away from where?" I asked. Without looking at me, he replied, "It doesn't matter." Then he fell silent again. The GPS was leading us farther and farther away from the city. The streetlights disappeared. Dense trees and large empty lots surrounded the road. Then, without warning, he leaned forward and said, "The house up ahead on the right. Pull into that driveway." I looked ahead. The house was completely swallowed by darkness. Slowly turned into the driveway of the old house. It looked like no one had lived there for years. The paint was peeling off the walls. The grass had grown waist high. The entire property was wrapped in eerie silence. I looked over my shoulder and asked, "Is this your house?" Without looking at me, he simply said, "Wait here, I'll be right back." He got out of the car, but instead of walking toward the front door, he disappeared into the darkness along the side of the house. 2 minutes passed, then 3. The uneasy feeling in my stomach turned into real fear. Finally, I ended the ride and shifted into reverse. But just as I was about to back out, the same man suddenly came running out of the darkness straight toward my car. He hurried back to the car and, without saying a word, opened the rear door and climbed inside again. His breathing was steady, but there was something different about his face now, a strange mix of anger and uneasiness. I worked up the courage to ask, "Is everything okay?" He looked me straight in the eyes through the rearview mirror and said in a quiet voice, "Take me somewhere else." I swallowed hard. "Where?" I asked. He replied, "Just drive. I'll tell you where to go." I shook my head. "I can't do that. You'll need to enter a new destination in the app." For several long seconds, he stared at me without blinking. Then, in the same cold voice, he said, "Fine, take me back to where you picked me up." My heart started pounding even harder, but I decided not to argue. I quietly turned the car around and headed back the way we had come.
The entire drive back was wrapped in the same terrifying silence. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Every time I looked, his cold eyes were already fixed on me. It didn't feel like he was looking at me. It felt like he was looking straight through me. Trying to lighten the mood, I forced a smile and said, "Sounds like you've had a pretty rough night." Without the slightest emotion, he replied, "You could say that, but it's not over yet." The moment he said it, my grip tightened on the steering wheel. A few minutes later, we pulled back into the deserted parking lot outside the old bowling alley. Before I could say a word, he slowly leaned forward and whispered, "Have you ever wondered how you're going to die?" The words hit me like ice. My breath caught in my throat. The moment he asked that question, my hands locked onto the steering wheel. Trying to lighten the mood, I forced out a nervous laugh. "No, I don't really have time to think about things like that." He didn't smile, not even a little. For a few long seconds, he just stared at me. Then, in an even colder voice, he said, "I think about it every single day." His words sent a chill straight through me. The next moment, he opened the door and slowly stepped out of the car. But before walking away, he paused, turned halfway back toward me, and looked me in the eyes. There was a strange, unsettling calm in his expression that made my blood run cold. Then he said the one sentence I'll never forget. "Tonight, you let the wrong man into your car." With that, he disappeared into the darkness. I sat there behind the wheel, completely frozen, for several minutes after he was gone. About a minute later, I finally managed to pull myself together and drove away as fast as I could. The entire drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. Every few seconds, I glanced in my rearview mirror, but the road behind me was completely empty. The moment I got home, I opened the Uber app. I wanted to find a passenger's profile and report what had happened. But what I saw made the ground seem to disappear beneath my feet. The trip I just completed had no passenger name, no profile photo, no trip details. It was as if the ride had never happened. I refreshed the app again and again, but every time, the same blank screen stared back at me. The next morning, I still couldn't stop thinking about what had happened the night before. Without wasting any time, I contacted Uber support and explained the entire incident in detail. I told them the passenger's information had suddenly disappeared and asked them to retrieve his profile. A little while later, they replied, but their response only made me even more uneasy. It read, "We're unable to locate a complete record of this trip. In some cases, this can happen if the app crashes or the ride is canceled before it is fully processed." I stared at the screen in disbelief, because I knew exactly what had happened. I had completed that ride. The man had been sitting in my back seat, he had talked to me, and before he left, he had warned me. So how could there be no record of him at all? Uber's response didn't satisfy me. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. I tried to replay every moment of that night in my head. Then one thought hit me. If that old house had really been there, maybe I could find some answers. So later that evening, I worked up the courage to drive back to the same area. The sun had already gone down, and the roads were almost empty. The GPS led me back to the same deserted road. But the moment I reached the location, my heart nearly stopped. The old house I'd driven to the night before was gone. There was nothing there except an empty field. No house, no broken fence, no driveway. It was as if nothing had ever existed there at all. I stood outside my car for several minutes, staring at the empty field. I couldn't believe it. The old house I had parked in front of the night before was gone. There was nothing there.
Then I noticed a small gas station across the road. I walked over and asked the cashier, "Was there ever an old house here?" He gave me a strange look before answering, "Yeah, years ago, but it burned down in a fire. After that, they demolished what was left and left the land empty." A cold shiver ran down my spine. If that house had been destroyed years ago, then where had I taken my car the night before? The color drained from my face. The cashier must have noticed. He looked at me for a moment, then quietly asked, "You went there at night, didn't you?" I slowly nodded. He was silent for a few seconds before speaking again. "A lot of people have claimed they've seen a tall man out there late at night. He asks passing drivers for a ride and has them take him to that empty lot." My heartbeat quickened. With a trembling voice, I asked, "What happens after that?" The cashier looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Some people say he simply disappears, and others say the people who gave him a ride were never seen again." A wave of numbness spread through my entire body. Had I really come that close to death that night? After leaving the gas station, I didn't go straight home. By then, my curiosity had become stronger than my fear. I started digging through old news articles about that area online. After a while, I found a short report from several years earlier. It said that a man who had lived in the old house on that property had mysteriously disappeared. Police never found his body. The case was never solved. But the moment I looked at the blurry photograph attached to the article, my heart nearly stopped. It was the same face, the same gray hoodie, the same cold, empty eyes, the same man who had been sitting in the back seat of my car the night before. Then his final words echoed in my mind. "Tonight, you picked up the wrong man." Maybe it wasn't a threat after all. Maybe it was a warning. After that night, I didn't drive for Uber again for several weeks. Every time I got behind the wheel, I couldn't stop seeing those cold, lifeless eyes staring at me through the rearview mirror. A few months later, I finally found the courage to start driving again, but I made one rule that I'll never break. If a pickup is in a deserted location, if a passenger acts strangely, or if my instincts tell me something isn't right, I cancel the ride immediately. Money can always be earned again. Your life can't. To this day, I still don't know who the man in my back seat really was. Was he a dangerous criminal, a mentally disturbed man, or something that even science can't explain? But his final words still echo in my mind. You let the wrong man into your car. If he had changed his mind that night, I probably wouldn't be alive to tell this story today. The end. If you enjoyed this true story-inspired horror tale, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because the next story just might be even more terrifying.
If you enjoyed this terrifying journey, subscribe to Mr. Nightmare 2.0 and become part of our growing horror community. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep.